Right, now before we cover a two-stage sky, I want to just quickly look at a situation that causes people new to watercolour probably more problems than anything else, and that's understanding how wet or otherwise they should have the paper before they put another layer of paint on. Because if it's, as it frequently is, too wet and flooded, then you find that when you put the next layer of paint on, that immediately it runs all over the place quite uncontrollably, and your picture is very often ruined before you get going. The secret is to have the paper just slightly damp, and as long as you can keep your paper damp with the paint that's going on, then you should have no problems. Let's look at the difference. I'm going to put on a layer of raw sienna onto the damp side. I'm doing that first because it's going to take a few moments just to soak into the paper and to dry out slightly. Now you can see it's quite flooded at the moment. You can probably see if I lift that up, it's very shiny, the lights are catching it, so it's very wet at the moment. And the problem usually arises with the enthusiasm of the newcomer who wants to get straight onto the next layer and forgets to wait for this to soak in a bit. Now let's have a look at this. We'll do another exactly the same on this side with the paint, with the same sort of watery paint that we're using. Don't forget, all the time this is soaking in and drying off a little bit. Okay, now we've got that just about as flooded as this one. Okay, so again you can see the light shining on the wet paint, and you can see here that the wet paint has actually run down towards the bottom of the page, but all the time this is just drying off to a nice dampness. If I put that blue-grey shadow colour in at the same strength onto this, well, this is what happens. And you try to do some clouds, you can see what's happening here. It's just running uncontrollably, like it looks like a demented elephant at the moment with rather big ears. Whereas if we use exactly the same strength paint on here, and this has had an extra no more than 30 to 60 seconds longer to dry or to soak in, now you can see I've given this perhaps no more than a minute longer, and although the paint is still spreading somewhat, which is really what you want for clouds, it's not spreading anything like as much as this, and it's certainly not running uncontrollably down the page. It's running a little bit, but that's something I'm reasonably happy with. Okay, we've let it dry now, we've given a little blast with the hairdryer to speed things up a bit, but 5 minutes later you can see the difference. So why not try this as a little exercise? You don't have to use the colours I've used, use any colours you want. Make the paper slightly less damp, almost semi-dry. Have this even more flooded than I had it, or somewhere in between the two, and see the way the paint reacts. Because the quicker you can understand how paint reacts with wet paper, the quicker you'll be able to learn to control watercolour as far as anybody is able to. Okay, let's move on to the two-stage sky. Right, now we're going to do a two-stage sky where we want two different types of cloud in the same picture. But for this to work, we can't do it in one go, wet in wet, because everything would blend together and probably turn to mud. So what we have to do first is do the soft-edged blended clouds first, let that go bone dry so the paper is absolutely dry, and then we'll go in and add the second layer of clouds very gently and very lightly so that they don't disturb the paint that's already on the paper. So let's have a look what I mean. Right, the colours I'm going to use are the ultramarine blue, the mix of the blue with the light red to give us a cloud colour to start with, and a little bit of raw sienna to give us a nice background wash to the clouds. So we're going to start off with just a general background wash of raw sienna. You can see I'm making no attempt to do it in stripes, just drag it over the picture here and there. I'm not worried about putting the raw sienna on this pale and it mixing with blue. It won't turn green. That's one of the good properties of raw sienna mixed with blue. And I think I'll probably end up doing a very simple landscape just to link it all together, just down in this area in a moment or two. Now we'll put a little bit of blue sky in here and there, not too much. You can see the blue mixing with the raw sienna already, and it's not turning green at all. And I think we'll have a little bit of ultramarine blue there. Take that up into the sky, take that up there. Okay, I'm going to bring in some of the cloud shadow now. Nice and gentle and bland. You can see it's mixing quite freely with the ultramarine blue and the raw sienna. And then as we get lower down the paper, I'm just going to do a few more distant clouds here, which get smaller and lighter. But I don't have to worry about making lighter paint, because the paint that's already on, or the water in the paint that's already on the paper, will do that for me. You can see that's happening already. I'll probably do a little, I think I'm going to do a little farmhouse and a tree. Yeah, I'll do a little farmhouse and a tree in this area here. Now you can see what I've done here. That wasn't difficult. Everything's just blended gently together. I've just had a vague idea in my mind of the sort of cloud formations I want to produce. And what I'm going to do is to bring in some of these darker clouds on this side of the picture, so they'll be balanced by the house and the tree on this side of the picture. But you'll see what I mean in a moment. Let's get this dried off. Okay, now although I've dried that with a hairdryer and the paint is dry to the touch, I can feel as I put the back of my fingers on the paper that it's actually still slightly damp. The back of your fingers, incidentally, are always more sensitive to check this out than the front of your fingers. So if you don't want to, and there's more likely to be grease on the fingers. Now you saw in that earlier sky when we had some grease marks in the paper. If you want to check out whether your paint is dry, just lightly touch it with the back of your fingers, and that'll tell you instantly, as it is now, that that's dry, but it's still cool to the touch, and I can feel a slight dampness in the paper. Now if I try to paint the next layer while it's still a little bit damp, then it's going to lift this paint that's already on and smudge it and turn it into mud. So I'm going to leave it to dry for a little bit longer. Okay, this is nice and hard dry to the touch. So we've let this dry. Depending on the atmospheric conditions you're working in, how much water and paint you've got on your paper, and the particular paper you're using, it could take just a few minutes, or it could take several hours to get bone dry. So there's no standard formula. You've got to work this out for yourself. Now what I'm going to do is put a hint of this grey mix, but much lighter. You can see how much water's in it. It's only a very, very pale grey. In fact, this is how thin we're going to do the paint. But if I had tried to put paint that thin on this whilst it was still wet, you'd have ended up with cauliflowers all over the sky, and it would have been ruined. Okay, I'm going to start from the left, and I'm just dragging the brush, still very, very lightly, because there's still a danger I can pick pigment up here from the underpainting, but I'm going to do this very, very lightly. Just a few clouds here and there. And now what I've done is gone into clean water, and I'm just going to take some of those bottom edges out, so that they're very much a sort of a hit and miss effect before we get too much of a tide mark, like that. You don't want to fiddle around with this, just drag a few soft edges out like that, Right, that's it. We're going to leave that now, otherwise I'm in danger of starting to lift off pigment. Right, now I've just added a little bit of a landscape here, one of my something and nothing landscapes, just so you can see the whole cloud effect into sort of context. And really what I try to do is this darker area here of the house and the trees are balanced by a slightly darker and stronger area here where we've got the blue sky and this little bit of cloud, extra cloud coming in. They're actually quite, I find these are quite therapeutic and quite good fun to produce when you're doing cloud studies, because there's no pressure to get anything right, and it does allow you to see what the cloud looks like in the context of a complete picture, simple though it is. But there we are, the two-stage sky.